We'll start with sort of introductions. My name is Donna Claire, and I am a senior manager at Innova Studios. And while I manage the overall creative services team at Innova, my personal current focus is the UX UI practice across the entire organization. So how did I get here? Well, I'm from Louisiana, born and raised, up until I was in my early 20s. And when I tell people that I'm from Louisiana, this is what they think. Actually, this is where I'm from. I'm a rice farmer and lived outside of a small village of maybe 20 people, and 18 of them were my direct family. So in the off season, we turn the rice fields into crawfish farms, and even every year since I've been in Chicago, my brother ships me sacks of crawfish, and every year we have a huge crawfish boil at my house. So early in my career, I spent years working at various agencies, first as a graphic designer, an illustrator, an art director, creative director. But it was almost an accident because my degree is actually in psychology, specifically in behavioral research. So I spent many years in college in a rat lab, running experiments in Skinner boxes on rats, and it was very fun. About 11, going on 12 years now, I got invited to apply for a creative director job here in Chicago, and I came, and it was about sometime in May, and this is what it looked like here, and it was beautiful. And I fell in love with the city, and I accepted the job, and I moved, and I spent the summer here, and then this happened, and I had major regrets and started questioning all of my life choices. But 2 years in, I was approached by a recruiter to apply for a position at a company called Innova, and that is where I met Joanna.
So hi everybody, I'm Joanna Bergraff, and I'm a graphic designer by background and schooling, and I work as one of the managers on Innova Studios, specifically overseeing the design, copy, and content studios. So I was born and raised in Chicago, and then raised kind of like further and further out into the suburbs, as immigrant families do. And so while I was raised here, I was raised by Polish immigrants, and I spent a good majority of my childhood going back to Poland to see 40 plus family members, and I'd spend my summers there. My parents also owned a Polish deli growing up, so I come from entrepreneurial parents. And during that time, I was a vegetarian, so you can imagine, to the thrill of my parents, a creative vegetarian amongst people who love eating meat and produce meat products. And I also went to art school, so my background is in fine art, but I also loved academics. So I started off as a dual degree student. I love studying, I love learning. So naturally after college, I got a job working in event marketing, and then tried my hand at entrepreneurship. And I found myself working in roles where I was constantly organizing people, working in spreadsheets, calendars, as one does after art school. Totally natural progression. But all of that experience led me to Innova as well, and that's where I met Donna. And together we manage Innova Studios. And about a year and a half ago, we changed from being a straight service organization to a creative agency. So with in-house teams, for those of you that may not be as familiar, that work other places, agencies usually, in-house teams work kind of in one of two buckets. One is you're a service organization, people give you tickets and you just kind of execute, and you're more of a production house. Or you could be an internal agency where you're more of a strategic partner, bringing ideas to the table, trying to impact the business's bottom line. And so we made a conscious shift a year and a half ago and renamed our team to Innova Studios. And both Donna and I have a good laugh about this every so often. But when we started at Innova, we thought, oh, cool, we're going to be working at a tech startup, and it's going to be amazing, cutting edge design, and we're going to get to do some really cool things. But the reality of the situation is that we spent 82 hours having hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about the color blue.
That's a true story. And it was one of the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and it kind of said to us, hey, we need to look at how we're doing things and see how we can do better. There's got to be a better way. So we started observing things, and as a shared service, we were, I think, in a unique position where we could see maybe breakdowns that occurred across the organization. So we identified 3 key things. The first, there was a huge, and I think to some degree there still is, a misconception that collaboration equals delay. So people have a belief that if you get all of the people in the room in the beginning of a project together, that it just impacts timelines in a negative way. Also, historically, I think a lot of our project flow was very waterfall. The team that started the project did their bit, wrapped it up, handed it off. It came to us at some point. We did our bit, we wrapped it up, we handed it off. And at the end, a dev team was working on a project that they had literally never seen or heard about before. And I think that kind of leads to closed door decision making and overall just a lack of communication and collaboration. So what could we do about it? Well, honestly, at first we complained a lot. But then, I don't know, maybe it's the psychologist in me. I love the idea of you can't change somebody else, but you can change yourself. So Joanna and I kind of spent some time doing a little self-reflecting. And we really wanted to look at the things that, the processes and things that we controlled fully, and of those things, how could we make changes that could have big, impactful results? And we kind of focused on 3 key areas. The first was our project request form, so the way that all of our internal clients are requesting work from our team. The second was kickoff meetings, so how do you actually start a project once you're ready to work on it? And the third was really establishing a UX process across our organization.
So I'll start with talking about the project request form. So originally, when we were doing some of our reflection, we thought, wow, we have all these challenges and breakdowns at the front end of a project. We're waiting for information. We don't know which people need to be working on it. You know, there were just these constant breakdowns and challenges. And we first started by, you know, we're going to get Donna's boss involved and the marketing managers involved, and we're going to, you know, change the way that they all operate. But then thought, maybe there's an easier way. Maybe if we just change our forms to adjust to some of those things that we're missing, that would give us what we need. And we were right. So a simple change of the form. So this is an actual screenshot of the project intake form that we use, and every single project we ask for background, what the objective is, and if there's a strategic insight. And then we also looked at, we did a great job of logging where the breakdowns were occurring, so depending on what type of project somebody chooses to submit, we have all of the details in here, and then anytime something comes up over and over, we're able to change the forms. And then the third thing that we changed in our own form was the way we asked about metrics, because as a strategic partner, we want to be able to help impact the business's bottom line. But if we don't know what that is, we can't measure it. So I'll talk a little bit more about the metrics later, but that was an important change. The second thing were the way that we did kickoff meetings. So every single project has a kickoff meeting, and like we talked about, you know, we both share the same philosophy that the more that all the key players are in the room at the start of a project, the better the collaboration will be, and the sooner we can get to something great. And so who are the key players in a kickoff meeting? Well, there's the creative team, and that could be the writers, the digital designers, the UX designer, and a lot of times it also involves the tech teams. So we do want a software engineer, like the person who's going to be coding this project, and if it can't be that person, somebody from that team. A front-end developer, a product manager, we want, if they're involved in the project, we want them there in the beginning, as well as the business stakeholders. You know, is it marketing, a marketing initiative? Is it operations? Is there going to be another stakeholder? We've had executives sit in on these meetings, and we find it to be very valuable. So there are some ground rules to the kickoff meeting. It's not just kind of free for all, right? You have the project request that's been submitted, which some people call a creative brief, but it's not necessarily always a creative brief at that stage. We're still sourcing information. We're reviewing it during the kickoff meeting to make sure that we have all the information. It gives people the opportunity to ask questions, and I think most importantly, you meet the people you're going to be working with, so you already start to establish that rapport and lines of communication early on. You also learn what the approval process is going to be. We do a lot, one of the changes we made is we do a lot of in-person pitching of work. there's so much more that can get communicated when you're speaking and having a dialogue versus, bullet points and everybody's too busy to read. So once we know what the approval process is, we can include those, we know who to include in those pitch meetings. And then finally, we also align on the timeline. It's important to know, is this a regulatory update? Is there something broken? Do we have a little bit of flexibility so that we know how to prioritize our own work and how to manage our workflow? And so some of you may be asking why the developers are included in the kickoff, right? Why though? It seems like that's a back-end function at the end, right? That we give them the creative files. Well, we're not okay with that. We're not okay with the people who are going to be building the product, the page, whatever it is, to get stuff at the very end. And in the beginning, we can learn, is there any technical overhead we should consider? They can tell us if what we're designing or what the product people dreamed up, is that actually buildable? Is it possible within the time frame? And here's the example that we can share with everyone. So we were doing some back-end redesign work of one of our account homepages for one of our brands. And we did all this UX research and user testing, and we built this pretty good-looking back-end design. And when it got in front of the coder at the very end of the project, and I will say there was a little hesitation, guess the project requester, the owner of the project, didn't want to include the developers, and so we're like, all right, well, we'll move ahead. But when it got in front of the developer, they said, all we can change in this 4-week sprint is what's inside of this top box, right? And the second design is what we came up with. It's fine, but we ended up working on this for months, and then we could have been working on other things had we understood what technical resources were required.
Okay, and then we also established a UX process that kind of spans across the entire organization. So this is our basic UX framework. The way that we sort of organize projects on our team, there were 3 major categories, and each of those categories kind of determines the level and extent of UX design and research that goes into any given project. We focus obviously on the concept and design phase because that's the heart of what a creative team does. And we kind of rework the way that we do this cycle, starting with prototypes and wireframes. As a creative team, one of our goals this year is something that I call 3 times creative, which is basically more creative. So we try to give our internal clients a version of what they are requesting. We give them our version of what they're requesting, and then we like to provide something new and unexpected and like exceptionally creative. So we start with a few versions of prototypes and wireframes. We test those concepts with lookalike audiences, so people that are similar demographically and location to our customers, and then we iterate and we make improvements and refinements on those mock-ups. This cycle continues as many times as is necessary for us to everybody involved in the project to get to a point where we feel good about it and feel like it'll perform well once it's in production. And then we apply the styles and we make it real. So that calculator that you were looking at, prototypes and wireframes, this is what it looks like actually in production. And it raised conversions by 16% lift, I think. So overall, it was a really good win for us. So after Joanna and I were able to kind of start doing those things that we could control, we noticed that we were able to achieve 3 kind of major wins. The first was that we are now able to tie the work that the creative team does back to business results and into their priorities. We've also established a procedure for conducting asset handoff meetings between the creatives and the developers. And we have established company-wide UX UI style guides for all of our brands.
So I'll cover the results part first. So the 2 things that I want to call out is we started asking for how are our clients measuring success? Because if they don't know, how are we going to know whether the objective's been met? And then also, what is the objective of the project? What are the baseline metrics? Where are you starting from, and how much do you want to move the needle? And oftentimes, because we are a data and analytics driven company, we're always looking at the numbers, but it's not always a number. And we want to know what that is so we know whether, first of all, whether we will meet the goal, but two, because we are a shared service, we can apply learnings from another project into any given other project. And this is an example I wanted to share. So this is a recent website redesign for one of our brands. And this is the refresh design, and the new version outperformed the previous version on all key metrics. And so that was a huge win for us. But not only that, we won a graphic design award for this one. And Donna and I feel especially validated because we both share the philosophy that good design drives bottom line business results. So this is proof in the pudding, if
Yay.
you will. So the second thing is the dev asset handoff meeting. So what would happen before we started having this meeting is assets would get to the developers, and sometimes they would get there, sometimes they would get really low quality JPEGs that they'd have to chop up in Photoshop themselves, interpret font sizes on their own. Sometimes they just have to make stuff up because the mock-ups, the legally and business approved mock-ups would never make it to the developers sometimes. And so we started holding the assets hostage, if you will. And then, so we could have that asset handoff meeting. They would get released at this time. So the first thing that happens is we share, the creatives and the developers have a conversation, and they go, we use Adobe XD, which is similar to Sketch if you guys haven't used it, Sketch or InVision or some of the other prototyping apps. But what XD does is you can look at the styles, the code, the padding, the spacing. You can look at font sizes, line height, et cetera. All of that's in there. So the designer and the developer can look at that together. They review basic functionality. We provide optimized assets and also reference the UX and UI style guide. So if something comes up that isn't in the mock-up, they're also empowered to make design decisions kind of on the fly based on existing styles. And I think the most important part of the kickoff meeting is establishing communication ground rules. So do people like to Slack? Do they like face-to-face meetings? Do they prefer email? The developers and creatives can talk about that and what's the best way to talk through different issues and challenges that come up. And the other thing that happens, so after the dev asset handoff meeting, our studio's project manager, Jennifer, who's in the crowd right there, she adds the studio's team into Jira Agile. And this is important. I want to call this out specifically because this was part of that self-reflection. We wanted to have some behavior change on the other end, but we didn't force them into our systems. The developers are in Jira Agile, so we went into Jira Agile after we get out of our system and work within the way that they work. And so what this does is it also, in addition to that, we also can know when things are in development. The creatives can be available for pairing. They could be available for ad hoc questions while a project is either in review or in development. And I task my team with being available throughout the entire life cycle of the sprint.
And then finally, we established some company-wide UX UI style guides. We update these on a quarterly basis because the website is a living, breathing thing, and I think we're all always trying to make improvements. These guides provide not just sort of guidelines for a designer, but also for a developer. It's both the front-end visuals, but also code snippets and some situational context around UX UI elements. So as a developer, if you're building a form and there are questions around, is this a radio button or a drop down or a checkbox, we have some sort of guidelines around those things. And lastly, all of our style guides are AA accessible, meaning that people with disabilities can access our properties both on mobile and desktop and via screen readers too. So the guides look something like this. It's actually like 40-something screens. It's a big, massive document. But it has the things like colors, where it has the code and tells you where to use them and how to do the backgrounds and when to use this background color versus another. We also have sections on typography. We are a mobile-first shop, but we also have specs for desktop. And then it has things like form fields. So what does an error message look like? What does inline validation look like? What do the form fields look like? What's the padding and the spacing? So that throughout the site and the experience, there's consistency. So why did we do this? Really, we had two goals. The first one is to really empower our tech teams to do work on their own. We don't need to be involved in every single thing that is produced by the company. My goal is that if there's a project that's coming up and it's based on existing functionality and existing styles and design, a dev team can grab the style guide, get the code that exists, and go to town and do it without waiting on us, without having to involve us. We come in at the very end to do checks during testing and QA, and so that we see what is happening and so that we're aware of changes that are going into production on the sites that we manage. The second goal, and to me the bigger goal, is really we want to foster an environment where the tech teams want to collaborate with us. So when we have a project that has new functionality or a new brand or a new product, we want to sort of set the stage for everybody to come together and collaborate from the beginning of the project request all the way through the testing and the iterating and the approvals and the coding and the testing and having things in production. Our goal is really to foster a communicative and collaborative environment, and so far it's working really well.
All right, so that's it. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that everybody in the room, whether you're on the creative side, the tech side, or the business side, you can walk away here with at least one way to foster collaboration amongst the different teams you work with. So Donna and I are also available. If you have any follow-up questions after today, you can email us, find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc.
Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you.